Minister, thank you very much for joining us on Bloomberg Television.
You're welcome.
Emerging markets have had a miserable year. How much of a headache has the Fed been for you?
Yes, it was. With higher interest rate, with liquidity going out of the Egyptian market, with also increasing oil prices as a side effect for that. So all of them were shocks to the Egyptian economy and to the public finance. However, I believe what we did 2 years ago was good, that we were able to observe all these shocks and to overcome them and to continue with our objectives. And as figures released for the first quarter of our financial year, it was as it was planned, even with the central bank, even with the interest rate, even with the exchange rate. I believe the Egyptian economy was able to deal with all the headaches coming from what happened in the emerging markets.
So with the turbulence in the global economy, what's more of a risk to you? Is it the trade tensions between the US and China? Is it higher rates from the Fed? Is it oil prices? I mean, what's the sort of, what weighs heavily on your shoulders?
If I read them, I would put oil prices increase the first, Fed interest rate increase second, and tension between United States and China and others will be third.
Do you think the tensions are going to get resolved, or are you preparing for more protectionism around the world that could affect Egypt as well?
I believe it's going to be resolved.
Sooner than later?
I believe it will be sooner. We can see what happened with sanctions on Iran, which was eased at the last moment, which as a result, you can see oil prices are declining. So eventually, whatever the decision, you have to take into account the global economy and what's going to happen. And I believe that the United States of America will take this into consideration very seriously.
You mentioned the collapse in oil prices. The budget that you have assumes an oil price of $67 a barrel. Are you going to hedge this year?
Hedging is one of our strategy. Hedging is a very complete process for us, which we can use it whenever we think is a good time, a good approach to use it. So one of our options, which we can use it at any time.
So what oil price triggers your hedge?
To protect the budget. Whenever I see that this is appropriate to go and take action in order to protect the budget and its objectives, we will go for that.
So would the red line be then $68 a barrel?
Let me say that we had good news that our consumption reduced by an average of 5% over the first quarter compared to the first quarter of 2017-2018, which made some sort of balancing out with the increase in oil prices, which resulted in just an increase of 1 billion Egyptian pound for the subsidy in fuel, which for us, with such increase in oil prices, to end up the first quarter with just 1 billion Egyptian pound deviations, it was good news.
The International Monetary Fund has downgraded its expectations for economic growth in 2019. Given what is happening in the global economy, is it time for you to take into consideration more downside risks to your forecast for 2019?
I don't believe they downgraded, but their projection is 5.5 GDP growth. Our projection is 5.8. Yes, we ended up the last year 5.3, which was they upgraded their projections to match with our projections, because their projections were 4.9. Our projection was 5.3, so they had to upgrade their projections to be 5.3, which we did. Exactly, we did 5.3. We finished the whole year of 5.3. This year, our projection is 5.8. They said their projection is 5.5. So let me say that between 5.5 to 5.8 is not that much. However, we finished the first quarter with 5.3. So we are waiting to see which projection will be the accurate one.
So you're more upbeat on Egypt, but again, to return to the point of the global economic slowdown or the slightly less, the slightly slower expansion globally, is that going to have an impact on Egypt as well? Because the reality is we have quite a few governments who have now trimmed their expectations for 2019. It's not just the IMF. Have you looked as well at revising some of your numbers, perhaps given what's happening with trade, given what's happening with oil prices, and given what's happening with the Fed?
Until now, we believe that we are on track. We did not downgrade any of our projections. We are waiting for the end of the first half of our financial year to see whether our projections would be as we planned, or we have to come out and say we have to change our projections and downgrade. Until now, I can't see a reason for us to downgrade our projections.
We've got some comments from Mark Mobius, who, of course, is a veteran investor in emerging markets. And he spoke to Bloomberg, and he says he likes Egyptian stocks. So you've got a fan in Mark Mobius. And the reason he has is that Egypt is not too closely allied with Saudi Arabia. That's the reason why he likes the story out of Egypt. To what extent have the geopolitics of the Gulf, and I'm thinking here along the lines of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, to what extent has that actually helped you sell Egypt as a place to allocate capital for foreign investors?
Let me say that we are very good friends and good relationship with our brothers in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf. Both of us are well connected. We have millions of Egyptians working in the Gulf, and in particular in Saudi Arabia and at Arab Emirates and Kuwait. Let me say that in Egypt we have been preparing the country to be ready for investment. So we invested a lot in infrastructure. Egypt is building 4 new cities at the same time. One of them is a new capital. It's a huge new network of roads, bridges and tunnels. We sorted out the problems of electricity, natural gas and many other, even our legal umbrella for investment. We've done a lot, and we aiming for attracting more FDIs to the country, and I believe that Egypt location is very good to attract more direct investment, particularly those who are interested to go for Africa, so they can benefit from whatever Egypt have with Africa, particularly that Egypt will be chairing the African Union in the coming year, and it has a lot of treaties with the African countries, so it can benefit from that.
Let me follow up on Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince is coming through town. What kind of new investments have you been looking at with the Saudis?
Let me say that the Saudis are investing usually in Egypt, and we are looking for more, particularly infrastructure projects, petrochemical projects, oil, natural gas, and also industrial projects. I will be saying one of the areas. So we are looking for increasing Saudi Arabia investment in Egypt. And I believe, again, that Egypt is now a good opportunity for investment, particularly our brothers from the Gulf.
So do you have an idea of the scale of new investments that could come in? Have you already started thinking about a number?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Let's get to the domestic story in a bit more detail. I mean, Egypt will complete its economic reform program with the IMF next June. A lot of the investors that I've been speaking to are keen to find out what happens once the program is completed and whether an extension of the program or a renewal of the program is an option.
Let me say that we were happy with the program with the IMF, and I believe Egypt is one of the few countries who completed such a program, successfully completed such a program, which is something very good for us and for the IMF as well, because this program was a very, very strict program and it was very harsh. However, it's a successful one because it took the Egyptian economy to a good form now and a good position. Let me say that we agreed that from the point of asking for further funding, we said we are now in a position that we don't think that we will need further funding from the IMF. This is number one. Number two, we are committed to further reforming our economy, and making our economic reform model is a good example for other countries. And with IMF, of course, we will be in some sort of forms with IMF. I know that this will give some sort of comfort to the international investors, and but let me say again and stress again that this doesn't mean that we're going to ask for further financing, or but we can be in some sort of cooperation. And by the way, we have already asked the IMF to be engaged with us on medium-term revenue strategy, and this is a very big program which can last for 2 years with IMF, which is a very good for Egypt when it is completed, because it can help Egypt to know how it will finance its vision of 2030.
So just to briefly flesh that out, so a renewal is on the table, but in a different form, maybe without the funding component.
I did not say renewal of the program. I would say we can see any further sort of cooperation in any model, and this will have to be discussed. But for the time being, I have to say we haven't yet. But the only thing which I am confirming that we may not ask for any further financing from the IMF.
Let's talk about demand for Egyptian domestic debt. It's been a bit of a tough time, so I'd love to get your view on some of this. Volatility, of course, sweeping emerging markets. We understand at least $7 billion has flowed out of some of the local treasury bonds in the 5 months. That's from the end of March. I'm looking at the data right here. That's pushed some of the yields up for local paper. Goldman Sachs even weighed in on this one. They've advised caution in a note to clients. At what point does the high cost of treasury bills keep you up at night?
Let me say we are very transparent with our people and with the international community and the international investors that a level of debt, we are not happy with that. We are concerned, and we are working on that. Even debt service level as a percentage of our expenditure is high. Yes, in addition to that, when the treasury bills and bonds interest rate went up, it added to our problem. However, let me say that we have a target to reduce our deficit, and we have a target to reduce our debt. I have to tell you that I am just coming from a meeting with the Prime Minister. We are talking about specific measures and specific actions which will help us to address both decreasing the level of debt and decreasing the level of debt service. And I believe that by June 2019, you will see that we have taken actions, and you will see that our debt level is decreasing and our debt service also decreasing. Let me say also that inflation in Egypt, our expectation that it will be declining in the coming months. So hopefully we will see also the interest rate declining. So all these can balancing out some of the negative effect of higher interest rate as a result of what went on abroad and inside Egypt.
Let me follow up on that, Minister, if I may. You're keen to lower some of your borrowing costs, and you just explained some of that. part of the strategy is going to be relying on some of the longer-term international bonds rather than the treasuries, which obviously cost you an arm and a leg. As you look to 2019, how much debt then will you issue? What's in your plan?
I believe that if we achieve our target of 2% primary surplus and overall deficit of 8.4 for this financial year, so our need for next year and the year after will be in declining mode.
So is there a rough figure for how much that debt would be in terms of issuances?
If you are asking about debt level or debt...
so the volume of debt issuances that you are considering?
Let me say that eventually I'm not 100% sure about what is going to happen next year and the year after, but it might be at the same level as this year or even lower.
And then would you divide this up into which kind of currencies? Because we understand from some of your previous comments that you're keen on diversifying. This goes back to the strategy that you were sort of trying to freshen up.
Let me say something. We will keep going to the international markets every year. Last financial year, we went for $4 billion and 2 billion euros. We're going to go for the international market this financial year. We haven't decided yet about the amount, the place, the currency, and the timing. However, we are very much interested and made it very clear. We will diversify. We will diversify markets, we will diversify currencies, we will diversify products. So we said that for this year, we are exploring the possibilities of euro and dollars, Eurobond in dollars, in euros. We are very much interested to go to the Japanese market and issue in what is called in yen currency.
Yeah.
And we're going to also, we are very much interested to go also to the Chinese, the Banda bonds. If we can do that this year, we are exploring to issue green bonds. So our interest is to diversify. We love to issue sukuk, but we will not be able to do it this year.
This fiscal year or?
This fiscal year. I don't believe that we will be able to do it, but I hope that next year we'll be ready to issue sukuk. So again, diversification is a criteria which we're going to do it.
So I mean, roughly, when are we going to see more activity in terms of issuances? Is it going to be the first half of 19, second half of 19?
I believe that it will be close to what we did in the last financial year. Last financial year, I believe we did in February and April. It can be around this time when we go for the market. We can go for the market once and do everything in one shot, or we can plan to go twice as we did last financial year.
I want to jump to some of the other steps you're taking to try and revive the broader strategy. You're in talks with Euroclear on settling domestic debt transactions, and that's part of the plan to attract more investment at a lower cost. When is local debt going to be Euroclearable?
We are working very seriously with them about it. We've taken some steps. Part of my team visited Brussels and met them last week. We hope that by April we'll be ready. So we hope that in the new financial year, all our local or domestic issuance will be Euroclearable.
And then on the other side, the emerging market bond index inclusion with JP Morgan. When do you expect to be able to approach them? Would that be another step that you take after it becomes Euroclearable? Is that sort of the chronology of events?
We are working parallel on both sides. And we think these two steps are important to work on them. And I hope that if it is possible, but I know to be included in GB Morgan index might take longer. But if we can also finish it by 30th of June 2019, it will be a fantastic news for us, because we think these tools will help us to reduce the cost of borrowing.
I mean, you want to meet your growth targets, but you don't want to borrow more. We've spoken about some of the components of your strategy. What other significant changes can you make to achieve those goals? What else do you have that's going to be new, that's going to be able to give you that leverage and that power?
Let me say that I rely on our economy to grow faster, which can create more revenue, which can reduce our dependence on borrowing to finance our deficit. This is one. Second one is structural reform in our economy. It must be done. It must be done because this can help us to achieve our target of GDP growth. I believe also that if we can rationalize our expenditure in order to ensure that you are working on both sides, increasing revenue and controlling expenditure. So you gradually reduce the gap and reduce the deficit. Let me say something. In the first 4 months, we have achieved primary surplus, 2.5 of the surplus we have achieved for the whole of last year, in the first 4 months. I believe this was a good news for us. We are targeting this year to achieve 2% of GDP primary surplus, which if we succeed to do that and to continue to do that for the following years, we will be achieving our ultimate objective of bringing our deficit, our overall deficit, from the highest level we had 3-4 years ago of close to 17% to below 5%.
Okay.
This will be the ultimate goal which will achieve that.
Part of those reforms include the latest measure in terms of what happens with the interest from treasuries. That's gotten quite a bit of heat in terms of the local conversation. How much do you expect to raise from this latest measure?
You mean the new
tax
treatment? I have to be very clear about that. I did not change the tax rate on treasury bills and bonds, still 20%. I did not change the tax rate on corporate companies, still 22.5%. I did not change. The only changes is to separate the tax treatment of both sides. And I do that similar to what has been done everywhere. The latest was Lebanon, okay? And it is inconsistent with the international accounting standards, okay? So it's not an additional, let me say, tax burden on financial institutions or something like that, as it was presented to the media. It is not true. And by the way, I consulted the Central Bank of Egypt. I consulted the chairman of the Banking Federation and many banks chairmen, and all of them agreed. How much it can raise? It can give us might be 6 to 8 billion Egyptian pounds.
So at this point, you don't expect...
However, let me say something.
Go ahead.
It will be for the new issuance after the law come in force.
Do you expect the move to affect demand for some of the treasury bills, be it local demand or foreign demand?
It can, but I always believe in the dynamic situation to adjust and bring things to the right direction, as long as mechanisms are correct. So it can affect in the short term, but I believe it will come back again to stability. Because some people saying, oh, why you don't increase tax rate on banking sector? Because they are making, I said, no, impossible. Our policies is to make sure we have stability in our policies, including the tax policies, custom policies, and everything. So what I'm saying is that it's a fair treatment for both, for the treasury and for the banking sector, or the financial institutions in general.
So this is not negotiable?
It is going to the parliament. Yeah. So if something to be negotiated, it has to be negotiated in the parliament.
Okay. Minister, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.